Thank you. Yep, this talk is about utilizing your red team for privacy. Probably in the intro mentioning I'm on the privacy red team. Those are maybe like 3 words that you haven't seen in that particular order before. So just some level setting. What do I mean when I say privacy red teaming? So maybe before that we have to go back a little bit further and discuss what red teaming is, or at least what sort of my view of red teaming is. So in the security space, we've used red teaming now for decades. It originated out of war games, and essentially the idea is that you think that you have some defensive posture, you think you're compliant with standards and regulations, but you want to know how those defenses might stack up to malicious actors. Or you have a dedicated blue team who's going to action against malicious actors on your product, and you want to see how they do when pressure tested. So in the security world, you get a bunch of hackers together. They're going to try to get around your defenses. They're going to find vulnerabilities in your system. They're going to try to access your network, compromise those machines, get lateral movement, get all the goodies. So at Meta, when we started the privacy red team, we wanted to take sort of the same model and apply it to privacy. So I'm just going to show our mission statement just to give you an idea of how we view things. So the privacy red team's mission statement is to continuously strengthen Meta's privacy posture through proactive testing of people, processes, and technology from an adversarial perspective. And the key phrase here is adversarial perspective. That doesn't just mean external adversaries. We also look at internal adversaries as well, but we're always engaging with the product in an adversarial way. There's a lot of privacy that falls under sort of compliance that has no adversarial component to it. We don't touch that part of privacy. Okay, so we got this focus on an adversarial perspective. Well, who the heck are our adversaries? And for this question, I just have sort of like two simple questions that you can answer to figure out who your adversaries are. What data do you have, right? This is going to vary wildly by what industry you're in. And there's going to be responsibilities for protecting the data that you have in your specific industry. If you're in health, for instance, you might be subject to HIPAA. If you're in social media, you're subject to other constraints. And then once you've identified what data you have and how it should be protected, you want to figure out who wants to access that data. So those are going to be your adversaries. And in this column on the right here, there's a heavy overlap with cybersecurity adversaries. Data brokers and nation-state actors are more than willing to throw 0 days and end days at your systems, try to compromise your network to get the data that they want. But you might find when you make this list that there's a lot of folks on that right-hand column that aren't captured in like a typical cybersecurity adversary. Folks like private investigation firms, stalkers, advertising agencies, or political campaign firms might be interacting with your platform in a very different way, right? But they're still trying to get the data that they want out of it. I think a very good example here of like a firmly privacy attack space, like on a technical side for me, is contact point enumeration vulnerabilities. So typically these are in like an account recovery flow where the attacker is trying to associate some contact point to a user, like an email or a phone number. This is a technical vulnerability. It's something that you should be testing in your systems, but it has nothing to do with security, right? The adversary is never gaining access to your network. They're never compromising a system. They're just leveraging essentially a side channel in your public-facing API. Okay, so you've kind of figured out like broadly who your adversaries are, and you probably want to understand them a little bit better. At Meta, we use 2 main frameworks for understanding privacy adversary behavior. One is the Privacy Adversarial Framework, or PAF. We open sourced it last month. And this is a TTP framework very similar to like MITRE ATT&CK. It's intended to essentially be a bolt-on for a cybersecurity framework like MITRE ATT&CK and focuses on the tactics, techniques, procedures that are somewhat specific to these privacy adversaries that fall outside of the typical cybersecurity threat actor. But then what you also want to understand is you want to understand what's my attack surface look like. So internally at Meta, we have this thing called the Meta Weakness Enumeration. I'm bound to get the question. We're not open sourcing that, but it probably wouldn't be very helpful to anyone because like all of Meta's infra is like completely homegrown from the ground up. So it would just be a bunch of gibberish. But basically, you need some way of understanding what your attack surface is, right? What kinds of weaknesses are your adversaries leveraging? What are the technical root causes for those weaknesses? So we use this pair of taxonomies to kind of map out the privacy adversarial space, and then use that to sort of guide planning for red team operations. So let's say you figured out, a class of privacy adversary. You found or identified some ways in which they've operated in the past, and you want to try emulating that in a red team operation. What are some kind of privacy-specific considerations that you might want to take into account? First of all, this is a question you never have to ask in security. Who's your blue team? So in security, you basically always have a dedicated defensive security org, and that's going to be your blue team. But in the privacy world, the privacy responsibilities may fall on different groups within your organization. That might be the product team. It might be a dedicated PET team, right? Someone is responsible for the defensive mitigations. You need to figure out who they are. And in fact, we've found that it's actually pretty helpful to engage them proactively and early and maybe identify a trusted agent. So you don't have to compromise operational integrity and ruin the secrecy of your op. You just take one person from that team and sort of bring them under the umbrella of the operation. This can be helpful for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can do purely external engagements in privacy, but you spend the first 3 weeks basically reverse engineering how the product works, and that's not really helpful for anyone. That doesn't inform on what your privacy weaknesses are. So sort of jump-starting that process with a little bit of internal information can yield better outcomes. The next thing that's useful, and we'll talk about this when we talk about findings, is when you come to remediation, privacy vulnerabilities might not be so simple as this is a SQL injection, you need to fix it. There can be a lot more nuance and back and forth, and having that trusted agent sort of prepped and sort of understanding the operation from the get-go can make remediation a little bit smoother. And then finally, in the security world, you have a lot of really great enumeration and reconnaissance tools. There's no Nmap in privacy, right? You can't just run scans on your things and say, here are all my privacy weaknesses. So getting to leverage some tooling maybe developed for your developers or for internal testing can help sort of act as a force multiplier for the red team operation. So you've identified your blue team. Now you might want to kind of scope down your operation. And we essentially run 2 different kinds of operations, and this has worked well for us. One we call the privacy adversary emulation. These are campaign style operations. So typically you'll pick a specific kind of privacy adversary and you'll say, I'm just gonna emulate this privacy adversary. I'm gonna do everything that they would do regardless of where it touches our infrastructure, our tech stack, and we're just gonna try to achieve their objectives. So these can be sprawling sort of campaign style operations. On the flip side, and this actually ends up being a little bit more popular of an offering for us, is we do what we call a product compromise test. Think of this as the pen test equivalent in the privacy space. So we'll scope down to a specific feature or API, some more limited scope, and we'll just try to enumerate all of the different privacy attacks we can against that particular surface, not really caring about which privacy adversary we're emulating. Okay, so you've identified a blue team, you've scoped your privacy red team operation, ready to go, right? Let's go kick some privacy ass. But you can't, because unlike in the security world, there are some serious considerations you have to take into account before running your operation. So if you're in the security world, sometimes you'll have a client and they'll say, hey, if you're traipsing around our infrastructure, have at it, go crazy, do whatever you want. But if you hit user data, just kind of leave it there and let us know and kind of stop. Don't take that out of our network and put it on the internet, right? But when you're thinking about privacy operations, some of that process, that exfiltration process, that collection of user data, figuring out what an adversary can do with different amounts of user data might be fundamental to your operation. So you need to figure out how to do this the right way. So we actually have a dedicated legal team that we partner with for every single one of our ops to structure the op in a safe way that adheres to global regulations, which are constantly changing. But then also you want to build in ways to minimize risk or build in mitigation. So maybe for some portion of an operation, you'll work with the defensive team to insert synthetic data that you'll be operating against, for instance. And then so this has led to us creating a bunch of different operating procedures. Some that are maybe interesting to take note of is, you need to keep track of all your operational assets. You need to have rules of engagement for how you're allowed to handle and process data that you do get from the platform, et cetera. And then you do your operation. And I don't have a slide here for how do you do the privacy red teaming, because probably the folks that you have doing security red teaming are probably good at this part of it. Like adversarial mindset, breaking things, finding loopholes, like it's the same skill set, but you're just applying it to a different domain. So they're going to find stuff. When they do find stuff, what do you do with it? A colleague of mine designed this infographic, and he lovingly calls it the pyramid of pain, which I think is accurate, but it's somewhat interesting. I alluded to this earlier, but when you find things that are clearly bugs, where the product functionality doesn't match the expectation of the developers and sort of everyone else, you can say, this is the issue, this is the bug, fix it. Pretty easy. You file an engineering ticket, an engineer gets to it, they fix it, they say, does it work? And you say, yep, you're good. When you're doing this kind of testing, though, you're going to find privacy issues that are a little bit more systemic. So you might find something where you've got some sort of multi-stage attack where you need to make roadmap changes in different aspects of a product. It's not just one thing that you can sort of write off. And then at the top of the pyramid of pain is a design issue. So something fundamental about this feature or product is not privacy preserving. And I'm sure we're going to hear about privacy by design stuff today and tomorrow. But the truth of the matter is most things aren't being designed. They're already out there, right? And so when you find these issues, you're going to have to really work with that product team to figure out how to remediate. And it might involve sort of fundamental redesigns to how the product works or what it needs in order to work. So your findings are going to fall somewhere on this pyramid of pain. And it's really cool when you find the top level ones, but also the most challenging to remediate. But along the way, as you're finding these different areas of weaknesses, you're going to be expanding your understanding of how privacy actors work and where those technical weaknesses, so those frameworks that I mentioned earlier, you're going to be adding your own tags for your findings. And then hopefully not falling too ill to the tyranny of metrics, you're going to try to measure how you did on the operation. It's really important, a lot of us in the sort of red teaming world, we like to win. But when you don't win, that tells you something too, right? So highlighting when defenses are effective, identifying if there's like significant gaps in certain areas. And I think a lot of folks, this is also on the tyranny of metrics, they want to quantify risk. They want to identify what the risks are and assign some level of risk to them. And red teaming is a pretty rare opportunity where you can actually look at realized risk, but you're not in like a giant privacy incident. So we end up being kind of popular with folks who are trying to understand what are the risks to this new feature or product. And then a couple of additional things that you're just always going to be asked when you submit some findings for your red team operation. How does the abuse scale? So if you're able in an isolated incident to get access to some user's data, the first question is, how does this abuse scale? So we actually work really closely with the anti-scraping team at Meta to validate and test some of our findings that way. The next question is one we thankfully don't have to answer because we have a giant privacy org with like thousands of people in it. But does this finding have any regulatory reporting requirements? We get to like ship that off and someone else makes that decision, but at a smaller organization, you might not have that luxury, so you need to figure that out. And then when it comes to remediation, sometimes the remediation for your issue could be technical, but it could be through some other means. So does the product behave consistent with what the consumer's expectations are? And if the answer is no, we're always going to mark that as a finding. But the remediation for that could be technical, or it could be a communication issue. Maybe you're not communicating how this product is working in a way that the consumer can understand, right? So you could have remediations that are more on sort of the communication front. And then the last thing we're always asked about is, okay, you found this issue in isolation. What kind of detections could we craft in order to catch them at scale? And this breeds like a really nice sort of working relationship where a defensive team might go with the findings from your red team operation, craft some detections, and then you come back later and sort of interrogate those detection methodologies, try to iterate on attacks that you discovered previously. And so that's basically it, and I'll just some takeaways. So think about, what kind of data do you have, what's sensitive about it, who wants it, who those adversaries may be, and how you can describe them. If you do set up a privacy red team operation, think about who your blue team is and pull in that sort of trusted confidant to help you structure your operation. And then the last one, sort of rhetorical, but when are you going to start hunting for privacy weaknesses in your own organization? That I'll take questions.